Welcome to the North Hills Church podcast. Where
I'm Ryan Ferguson.
And he's stealing my lines at the very beginning. This is the way it's going to be. I already have a feeling. I knew coming into this podcast, this is what it's going to be like.
Just mute him now.
Yeah.
Just
There's
mute
going to be
him
two
now.
of us on this podcast. Welcome
Yeah.
to the North Hills Church podcast, where we take a deeper dive into unique content created just for you. I'm your host, Ryan Ferguson, and you've already heard from some of our guests. But before we get to them, let me get you caught up where we are. We're in the middle of a series called Jesus and Politics for Wisdom Fest in the summer of 2021 here at North Hills Church. And we are doing a couple of additional podcasts to give you more information about that delicate topic. The last time we got together, the three of us, we talked about what the Bible actually says about leaders and how it tells us to respond. And we wrestled with issues like how do we thank God for leaders as we're commanded, praying for them, honoring them, and then what that looks like in life today, especially in light of when those letters were written to the early church. This week, we hope to go in a little bit of a different direction and have us talk in front of you about some of these hot button topics and hopefully kind of model out what that looks like. So this week I thought I'm going to introduce the people that are here rather than having them tell you a little bit about themselves. So first, to my far left is Matt Nessberg, the political right-winger who voted for one Donald J. Trump and owns more guns than Bibles. Matt, glad you're here. To my immediate left is Alan Shearer, the political liberal who gave up the Bible for Kamala Harris's blog and voted for one Joseph Biden.
That
and
is
then,
actually true.
if I want to introduce myself, I am Ryan Ferguson, the nonpartisan political mamby-pamby who ignores the sacrifice of all who gave him the right to vote by not voting and therefore has no right whatsoever to comment or complain about anything political or partisan.
That was good. That was good.
That part was
That was
helpful.
good.
You're more of a castrati American.
Castrati?
Don't. Just go.
Look it up.
Don't. Just go.
Oh, my word.
Go.
So welcome to the show. Welcome to your hosts.
Come on, that was funny.
Okay. The interesting thing is, all three of us, even though I used some funny language there at the beginning, the slots that I put us in are accurate. So what we want to do is figure out how does that work? Is that an anomaly? And maybe it is in conservative church world that exists together. All of us are on the same elder board here at North Hills Church. Not only that, Matt is one of my best friends. We've been friends for probably a couple decades. Matt and Alan are dear friends. Alan and his wife have been amazing prayer partners for Rebecca and I over the years. So how does that work? Especially when, as I've given those kind of areas in which we reside politically, there are hot button questions that we might have for each other in dialogue. I'm aware that you guys have dialogued a couple of times in the past year since the election. So can we ask each other some of those questions? And then even talk about it honestly? What have the tones of those conversations been like together? And then kind of take that into, okay, well, what applies biblically that lets us still love, serve, and lead together? And hopefully that interaction could flow into our listeners' lives, whether that's at a church gathering, in their life group, in their family, all of whom, if they claim to be Christians. So, what are the questions that we would ask each other that are hot button topics between us on politics?
Do we just jump right in?
Sure.
Oh, boy.
So, can I interrupt before?
Yeah.
And hopefully our listeners will feel this one is a lot looser than any of the other podcasts that I've ever done, and I've hosted most of them. This is off the cuff. They actually didn't know that I was going to kind of run in this direction, but I think it's going to be helpful. So, Matt, you were going to ask a question.
And we'll see if we all have jobs when we're done.
So I think that I know that abortion is a big issue in many people's lives in the circles that we run in our church. Let's just talk about our church. And of course it is, and I think it's important for all of us. So because of that, and because of that ends up being a major factor when you vote, when many people vote, what does the platform of the party say about that issue? And the two major parties in our culture have disparate views on that. And so I know that people struggle. And so I would turn it over to you, Alan, and say, I would love to know how you resolve that in your mind. Someone who, in this past election, voted for Joe Biden, how do you unhook that and go ahead and vote for something? I know you care about. I know that's important to you, and you care about that. But that's a tough one for a lot of people, and I'd love to hear you talk about that and kind of how you get there.
Yeah, sure. So for the record, I hate abortion. I mean, abortion is the taking of a human life, and there's no defense for it. Biblically, it's as clear as anything could possibly be. I'll just for context, like 40 years ago, I was standing on streets outside abortion clinics, like here in Greenville and in other places, trying to persuade women not to have abortions. My mother has been super active in the movement. She worked on staff at Operation Rescue, which some people may remember. So that's a big deal to me. Like, that's not a small issue. And, I'm very happy for that conservative presidents have appointed justices who affirm the sanctity of human life. And with that, but there are other issues also, like abortion. Our convictions about abortion rest in our convictions about people being made in the image of God. Whoever they are at whatever stage of life, if they're a fetus or if they're a 98-year-old person that we think has no quality of life, in the eyes of God, that life is precious. And there are other issues also, like when I'm looking at who to vote for, that are also issues that relate to the image of God. And I don't want to get deep in the weeds, but just to throw out one example, to me, the way we think of immigrants and outsiders is also very much a sanctity of life issue, that people are in the image of God. And so just to take that one issue, when President Trump characterizes people who are from other places and just kind of throws out this blanket statement that they're drug dealers and rapists, and creates a culture in our nation of xenophobia, and that we see someone who's different and we kind of immediately think they're dangerous, they're evil, they're not one of us, they don't belong here. That's also a sanctity of life issue. And so when you have people on each side that are affirming sanctity of life, and there are many, many other issues, now we have to choose between the lesser of two evils. That's the way I felt about it. And so in the last election, I just felt the overall impact of all of these issues, if you look at it broadly, the effect of having Mr. Trump as president was going to be more destructive than having Joe Biden as president. So I don't know if that's...
So when it comes to, pretty quickly after Biden took office, he signed some executive orders, some of which were very pro-abortion, like releasing restrictions off federal funds and stuff like that. And some of the ones have been executive orders that have happened since Nixon was in office, and they go back and forth depending on who's in office. But as someone who hates abortion, how does that make you feel when it's almost as soon as the guy takes office, he begins signing executive orders that are directly supporting something you hate?
Yeah, I hate that. I grieve. I literally grieve, because it's not just a policy, but all of that is going to impact lives in real ways. And so it's not surprising, is it? Like, is anybody surprised that Joe Biden is doing what he said he would do? And in the same way, I look at President Trump. If he had been reelected, certainly there are things that he said he was going to do that would have also been grieving. So I guess we say you hold your nose and pull the lever. I'm not a deeply or you hold your nose and just
Hold your nose.
Hold your nose.
retreat from everything and just get in your little box and
Castrati American.
do whatever you're going to do, right? Just I can't hear that word often enough. So, like, I am not a very political person. Like, to me, politics, it's like public transportation. It's like what gets us closer to the goal, what gets me closer to where I want to be. So I didn't have any illusions about Joe Biden. I didn't vote for him because I thought this is like a righteous man who's going to advance all the things that I believe are biblical and important. But I did believe, and I still do believe, even after the first 90 days or whatever it is of his presidency, that on balance, when I look at the whole, slate of issues that I see in the Bible, I still think it's better, but I don't think it's good.
That's an interesting distinction too.
Yeah.
Good, better, best.
It's certainly not best. Yeah. I mean, people sometimes will say, people who are aware of, the way I think, they'll say, how can you believe the Bible and vote for this person? But a lot of it's just like, which parts of the Bible are we reading, and which parts of the Bible are going to be, determinative in our minds when we go to pull the lever. So, like, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of verses in the Bible that tell us to love the stranger. Like, that is a fundamental biblical value. And you and I have talked about this. I understand how you look at it and say, yeah, but in the way I assess the lesser of two evils, or however you think,
Right.
I just think the abortion thing is a bigger thing. Okay, I understand that. But what I don't understand is people who act as though all the statements that God makes from Genesis to Revelation about loving strangers, loving them as ourselves, that doesn't necessarily mean that we let every single person who wants to come into this country, but it does mean that I don't treat strangers as though they are inherently evil because they're different from me. And that's a big deal in the Bible. And to me, there are other issues like that.
Yeah, and that the immigration issue is hard. It's a tough one because policy comes in. What decisions you make with regard to those foreigners that would want to come into America. That is hard to wrestle with for sure, and then how to apply those biblical principles. And like you said, there's no party that is the Christian party that makes me go, oh yeah, they got it right on everything, and
Absolutely
that makes it hard. It is a lot of choosing and prioritizing.
But I want to ask it back to you, because like when I read it, so when I read my Bible in 2 Timothy 2 or 3, it says, in the last days there'll come perilous times, because men will be proud, arrogant, boasters, greedy, unreasonable. Like, you read that list, and again, I pray for Donald Trump. I do everything in my power when he was president, and still I do everything in my power to honor him. But almost every single one of those words, in my observation, seems to describe Donald Trump. Yeah. And the last phrase in that section of the Bible says, "From such turn away." So you and I have had this conversation. Like, I understand the Republican platform in most ways is superior to the Democratic platform. I get that. But, like, how can you endorse a man as a leader that the Bible, like the character qualities, the Bible specifically says, turn away from that?
Yeah.
How do you get there?
Yeah. So it like you described the struggle with your decision. It is a struggle. I hope for every Christian that really is looking at it to go, I realize that I'm not voting for. There is no perfect candidate. And for Trump, for me, it was it's a hard thing because when I grew up through the 90s, the late 80s, early 90s, the mantra of the Republican Party is that character matters when Bill Clinton was president.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it didn't matter.
It was kind of convenient.
That's just the truth.
Right.
It mattered, and then it didn't matter. And I had to personally go, what in the world happened? And in 2016, I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton either. I voted third party because my conscience, I couldn't get there. However, over the 4 years,
that is absolutely. I didn't know that. You never told me that.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating to me. Like, how could you be in that place in 2016 and
Right.
then you have 4 years of data?
I know. You would think it'd be opposite.
Yeah. and I would think as bad as Joe Biden is in many ways from our framework, it would seem like he's better than Hillary Clinton, maybe, or not.
Well, why don't I'm going to interrupt just to moderate that question because I'm not sure that's going to get to the question of change of
Well, he's
4
fascinated
years ago,
me with this whole
right.
thing.
Well, 4 years ago that happened. I would put
Yeah.
it this way, if it's fair. How did you re-educate your conscience to do what you didn't do?
Right. So I voted for one of the conservative people in 2016, but I watched Trump, who every Christian that I know, he drives them his mannerisms drive us crazy. But I did agree with many of the policies that he pursued. So when it came time for in the 2020 election, I really started to wrestle with, I don't like the person. What am I going to do? And I spent a decent amount of time reading the platforms. And I talked to some Christians who said, I never vote for the person because all the persons stink. But what does the party platform say? Now, I think we'll all agree that every party doesn't do what they say they're going to do. But what do they say? What are they saying? This is what we're about. And I read Democrat platform, Republican, Libertarian, and Constitution, maybe even the Green Party. I just tried to read a bunch of them. Like, here's the major tenets without commentary. Just here's the major tenets. And for me, I was like, okay, for my conscience, I was able to say, I do not like the man. However, of the party platforms that I've read, this is the one that more things I can support than any other party platform. And that's where I came to. And I was able to, in clear conscience, say, I'm voting for the party, not the man. And that might sound like a fine distinction because the man represents the party in every case.
It's interesting, and I'm going to ask you a question. It's interesting to me. And a lot of this for our listeners is very experiential for each of us. So I did this last time. Just be charitable with us in any of your comments, replies, questions, emails. But it's interesting that you say, I don't like Donald Trump. And I don't know that I've heard you, but that's typically the language I've heard. But when we talk about the other party, it's moral. It's not that I just don't like Biden. It's he's
okay,
personally wrong.
I actually do think I'm going to really make people mad.
Yeah.
I actually do think Donald Trump is immoral. I mean, when I say I don't like him, it's not just his bluster. I do think that I don't think we're voting in general. My personal opinion is that by the time you get to that level in politics, you've compromised your integrity somewhere. I don't care who you are. That's my opinion. And so the more you learn about Donald Trump, I mean, I could share stories of things that I've read and watched that have just turned my stomach. And I would say the same thing about Biden. You don't get to that level without compromise. You don't stay in politics for 45 years or whatever that Biden has been in national politics without compromising somewhere. And, and there's been stories that have come out and things that have been shuffled around and whatever. So I would say that as far as the person goes, I do think that neither one of them has their integrity intact.
So if we get to the point where we say this platform is so immoral. No matter what, I can't vote for it.
Interestingly,
That's-
I would just, can I modify one thing I said?
Yeah.
Interestingly, and I might be wrong, but I feel differently about Mike Pence. I feel like he actually might be a genuine believer.
I've met him personally and talked with him, and his faith is very, very important to him.
And that's what actually bothered me so much, that Republicans turned on him, including Christian Republicans, because he's our brother.
Yeah.
And
But-
we say we uphold the Constitution, and he sought to do that.
Right.
And he's our brother. But anyway,
and
that's
now
another-
apparently his career is pretty much over, from
Yeah.
what people say. So if people get to the point where they say this platform is so immoral, I can't vote for that, which I understand that. And then we get to the point where we say, but this person is so immoral, I can't vote for that. Then are we all going to go in Ryan's box and just retreat from the world like a monk?
Thank you for that characterization. Alan.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
I mean, is that the point we're getting to
And
in a two-party system?
And you're in good company. John Piper wrote an extensive article before the election, essentially holding your position. If I read it correctly.
Oh man, don't empower him that way.
I was going to say no.
We're not going to be able to live with him now.
No, I that's funny you say that. I was like, okay, if I line up with Piper on that issue, great. There's other ones where I don't want to be lined up. That's another podcast. No, I think if the language you used, and I think this is going to sound a little defensive, I have voted. It's not I don't have I'm a non-voter. I voted 2016 third party.
Why? That surprised me. Why in 2016 did you choose to vote and vote?
Just it was at that point my conscience was I can exercise this and move forward in this moment. I couldn't this time with the two. If it's conscience, and I've had this talk with my kids and other people. Part of this is personality, but the concept of lesser of two evils is something I can't work through, and I've asked help for that, but I just can't get there to do that, believing that this is a good thing to do. And that's where many people have a problem with me, is that the vote itself is the good thing. Like, you should do that just because that's a good thing. I've been given I kind of mentioned this last time, that's a God-given right. Therefore, you should exercise it. I've been given the debtor's ethic model of military have served, so you have that right. Therefore, you should you have to, because of what they've done. And my dad was in the service. I don't dismiss those things. I had a great conversation with a young woman who was talking about she struggled with me in that way because of the women's suffrage movement. Like, it took forever. I mean, that is very recent history, if we think about it, that women could participate in voting, and yet I don't. But for me, it all comes down to that moment of I can't get a sense of strong belief that I should do this. So your characterization of platform and character is actually super helpful for me and was accurate. Like, I can't go platform as led by Joe Biden. I can't go character as led by Trump. And I actually don't believe the platform that I'm being told by Trump. So, like, when you said you have to go by what they say, I agree with you. But when I've been told the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over, and it doesn't happen, especially in very serious issues, then at some point, and when the power was there to do something, I then go, okay, what am I really being told? And then I just lack the for me, heaven help me, the necessary faith to go, this is a good thing to do.
Yeah, so here's a great example. Like, all right, here we are all serving together, and we're all operating really more than anything else based on our conscience, because none of us is immersed in political. We don't read newspapers all the time. We're not immersed in that. So you, because of your conscience, can't vote for something that's less than righteous, or at least reasonably righteous. You, in your conscience, can't vote for a platform. You just can't do it. Your conscience, at least to this point, for the most part, your conscience will not let you vote. I can't do that. Because if I do that, I'm like contributing to that. And in the same way, my conscience is like, I look at this man and the way he talks, my perception of the effect of the way he talks, what that's fostering and how that's going to work out in homes all across America, what's going to work out for what it means to be an immigrant in this country, and the way people look at you and talk to you. I cannot vote. My conscience will not let me vote for that. So what's going on when you have three pastors whose consciences are constraining them to operate in different ways? Like, two of you have to be wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
Wow.
I mean,
And I sit over here going, I have an active conscience, and you both have seared yours. That's really the answer. I listen to mine, and you sear the other side of yours and just go on blindly.
Huh.
And the reality, just so people know, like, I love you guys. Like, I am so happy to serve with you guys. And there are times that I listen to what you say. I look at on this kind of thing, and I say, I just can't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Have you guys ever argued in a tone that's different than what we're doing right now?
Oh, yeah.
So would it be accurate to describe it as perhaps having more heat?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because I think that's...
but you don't understand. Like, sheer is infuriating, like, just in general.
Let alone politically.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual gift.
Yeah. So where I think you're headed, Alan, I think that's really helpful, because what does make the difference? Because, and I want to be careful here, but one of the things that personally I think is of value, and I've mentioned this in our elder meetings, is I think letting people know this and see this is actually great. I am probably the least read and educated politically of the three. That's, if you don't know me, that's not false humility. That's just true. I don't read and go as far as these guys, but us being able to say, I'm here, and this is how I think and why I think that is of value, because party can't define Christianity and church. Like, that's been part of this series. That can't be. So what is it that allows us, like, and maybe we could hear from each of us, and here maybe root ourselves biblically, what allows us to look at each other and be heated and completely disagree on the practice, but what lets us do that?
I don't think, like, Matt and I, first of all, Matt is such a gift from God to me, because he's a safe place for me, that as I'm thinking through this, as I get frustrated, I can express that to Matt, and he'll listen, and he'll give me feedback. So I don't feel like Matt and I have ever been angry at each other about this, have we?
I don't think so.
No, but we will freely articulate, what we think about the way each other is thinking. And I just find it so valuable, because no matter how right I know that I am, and I think we all basically know that, there are still joke.
Right.
There are still
You
things.
didn't have to say joke. Everybody knew that was ridiculous. Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I don't think they did.
People that didn't know you by this point in the podcast knew that was a joke.
Okay. The point is, there are just things that I'm missing. And, when I say a question, how can you do that? And then Matt says, this is how I do that. And it's like, oh, okay, that's helpful. And I think really, for me, I just kind of jumped in there, but I think it's just like, I know Matt's heart. When we differ on this, there's never a moment that I think you're evil. I just don't. I just know you. I know your heart. And so therefore there's a genuine desire when we have these interactions, like, I want to know, because all joking aside, I know that there are parts of this that I'm missing. And to have a person that we can be honest and lay it all on the table and still love each other is what the church is all about to me.
Okay, so let me stop you there. So if you've used this phrase twice, I assume I'm missing something. Can we, off the top of our heads, root that idea in Scripture? Like, what is that biblically as we interact with people? Because again, we're attempting to model in the way we disagree how other people can disagree. What is that biblically to come into something that gets heated, but the operating assumption in the back of my brain is I'm missing something? Can you think of how we could root that scripturally real fast?
I think it's humility. I think you have. I mean,
Good.
We come into worship and we either say, God, I thank you that I'm not like Alan who votes Democrat, because I vote Republican. I support pro-life causes. I thank you that I'm not like him. Or we come in and say, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And if our posture is, God, be merciful to me, a sinner, then it puts us in a place of maybe I'm missing something then. If a Christian who has the Spirit of truth in him, and this is what I keep going back to, I believe the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of truth, lives in Alan and in me. So if we both have the Spirit of truth living and active in us, as the Scripture says, and Alan is coming to a different conclusion than I am, I can either say he's ignorant, he's immature, he's unspiritual, he's seared his conscience, he's suppressing
It does happen.
the Spirit's work. Yes, it does happen, but I'm talking about us, me and you.
We're the voters. We're talking
about
the
the voters here, the Americans, if you will, not the communists.
Oh, it got real.
But we're talking about humility here.
Oh,
that was a great illustration.
Oops.
I love the way you
Oops.
did that.
But if the Spirit of truth lives in both of us, and he's saying something opposite that I think, it's such flawed logic. It's such, I got to at least give some kind of space for that, don't I?
Yeah.
To go, the Spirit's working in there, and I still don't agree with Alan. Today, it's not like I'm going, oh, okay, I actually don't agree with the line that he takes to get to where he did, but I still respect the guy and believe that the Spirit's active in his heart and life.
I think of the passage in 1 Peter, based on what you said, clothe yourselves with humility. Like when you come to someone else, and that's the context of interacting with people, clothe yourselves with humility. Put on your humble clothes before you talk about politics. So kind of a humility. This assume I'm missing. Alan, would you say anything more about that? Like, again, I root that in something.
Yeah, James, so many verses, but James says, and this is King James, this is what I memorized it in. He said, be not many masters, knowing we will receive the greater condemnation. So if I'm going to operate as though I got the truth, I got it nailed, and if you don't agree with me, you are ignorant or evil. Those are the two choices. James says if you want to take that posture, then you're setting yourself up for a greater degree of accountability. So,
good.
Yeah, that would be one.
Matt, how would you, kind of in the same way that Alan came at this, how can we do this? He went with the, I assume I'm missing something, which led us to humility. How can this work? How would you answer that question?
What was the question again? How does
this work? Let's go with something other than humility.
How can we disagree so profoundly and strongly about things and still care for each other, build one another up?
Yeah. The commands, we have to love one another. Like it's not an option to not love one another. And over and again in the Bible, the Bible talks about loving each other. It's not just a matter of tolerating or putting up with Alan or you, frankly, with different views politically. But we actually are called to love one another. It doesn't mean agree with everything, but we're called away from division in the sense of blowing my brother up. I mean, Romans 14, 1 Corinthians, the whole book of 1 Corinthians is about the church dividing over partisanship. It starts in chapter 1, verse 12 or something. Paul, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Cephas, I'm of Christ. That is party politics right there. This is, I'm the party of Paul, I'm the party of Peter, and so on. So the Scripture warns us against that. Instead, it calls us to love, and right in the center of, close to the center of 1 Corinthians 13, which is all about 1 Corinthians 12, differing gifts. People are going to have different perspectives and different gifts, but every part is valuable. Oh, by the way, love one another. So for me, I'm going to share this Sunday, is one of the big things for me is believing the best about the other person. Like that's what it says in 1 Corinthians 13:7, that it believes all things, that believes the best about the other person, which for me makes a lot of difference. So I don't agree with your not voting perspective, but and so I can go, well, Ryan does not care to be a good steward of the things God has given him. That's how he comes to that. Or I can go, I can believe the best and go, actually, Ryan does and is a good steward of everything God has given him. So I'm starting from a place of not of Ryan's a failure, but actually God is working in Ryan. And of course he loves the Lord. Of course but he's coming to a different conclusion than me. Hey, Ryan, it looks like to me that you don't care to steward God's gifts to you. Can we talk about that? In which I will learn that I was wrong about that. And actually, he has reasons that leads him to that I might not agree with, but I can go, oh, but I'm starting from the place of believing the best about the other person. Same thing for you and same thing for me, is believing the best about the other person and starting there is one of the centerpieces of love in 1 Corinthians 13. And so as Christians, I take the commands of the Bible seriously, and as we kind of begin to unpack what the Bible says about our relationship to each other, it has to affect this area of politics as well.
I'll kind of throw in my 2 cents here, and then we should probably wrap up this conversation. I feel like one of the things that informs me of how we can differ and yet still be okay is one of the works that God began in me decades ago, and I think is going to be something that he's always reforming me in, and that's just the use of my words. There's been a lot of joking and cutting here, but all three of us are able to use that in very destructive ways, and I did that for a lot of years and still do wrong things, but with my words. But I think in the political realm, if we're humble and we love each other, then that's going to also drive me to obey what God says about my actual words. And God is unbelievably specific, in both testaments, that there is a time for words and a purpose for words. Mm-hmm. Just because something is true doesn't mean it needs to be said. Because if it's not at the right time, then it's not the right truth. So I think of Ephesians 4:29, let no corrupt communication, which is not swearing, that's words that go into another person's brain and rot them. Let no corrupt communication come out of your mouth, but only that which builds up at the proper time, that it'll give grace to the hearer. Listen to all of those things that those words are supposed to do. So take that into your attitudes towards each other, even when heated. It feels and hears, if I can put it that way, like we're in here to build each other up on this topic as someone who has the Spirit and has the Spirit, but we disagree. And to me, that is just, if that could happen in the realm of politics, I think it'd be amazing, where people are actually asking themselves and someone they're dialoguing with, hey, are we building each other up? Because if we're not, then God would literally look at us and say, it's not the time to talk.
Yeah, the comments between Christians, I'm not talking about non-believers, on social media, it was just hideous so discouraging. When you were talking about the tongue, it's Proverbs 18:21 or something like that. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. And I think and those who love it will eat its fruits, or something like that. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. And you can see during this election season how we could sow life or death and then eat its fruits.
And there's so many places we could go in Proverbs. The image in one of the poems in there is a man whose words are like sword thrusts. Mm-hmm. When there are many words, transgression is unavoidable. But he who restrains his lips is wise.
So that would be Brother James, he's how do you stand in church and bless God and then curse your brother. Like, you can't have a fountain that's like, oh, that's so delicious, that's so tasty. Oh, that tastes awful.
Yeah.
You know, that it's incongruent.
And I think that is where in the dialogue that we've participated in on these issues, I think if we were to give gifts out of this podcast, it would be put on your humble clothes, know that the driving ethic of following Jesus is love, and then that will practically inform what you say, when you say it, and how you say it. And so that's how three disparate friends politically can serve on the same elder board in the same church and love each other and disagree strongly. So as we wrap up this...
Cue closing music, go.
Thank you for taking over technical direction for our producer, Tyler. So we want to just take a moment here and kind of end this podcast, as it also will end this Sunday with the Jesus and Politics series during this summer, to just implore everyone to those things: love, humility, and kind words. If we take those three things, following the way Jesus lived his life in the context of American politics and the church, we hope that would change the nature of the way we even worship and serve together, not just three elders, but all of us who are part of the same body, members of the same body, that we would love and cherish each other that way. So thank you for joining us. Stay tuned. Look for future podcasts coming, and thanks for listening.
And get out and vote.
Oh, my word, you did not just finish it like that, did
Vote
you?
Republican, though.
That's what I've
the
been
right
thinking
way.
the whole time. Why don't you vote?
I literally, it's rare that I'm speechless, but in this moment, I literally don't even know what to do with you two. As the mature leader of this podcast, I'm going to re-end and thank our listeners for their kindness in listening.
Why do you hate America?
You're unbelievable. They're not going to let up. Friends, thank you for listening. We really appreciate it.